chance, away with pomp and circumstance. Come join our merry dance to the rhythm of goodbye. Farewell the jewel crown, farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the king of nothing really. Wave of a hand and a life of Riley. Pot Nazi, Pod King Billy. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the dear old mum, mummified on gin and rum. Smile and wave and just play dumb. Goodbye to the crown. Farewell the jewel crown, farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the crown.
Hello there, and welcome to The Monarchy with me, Samson Sees, here on Press TV. This is the counter-mainstream program that focuses on the one and only United Kingdom. Of course, the stories we give you will not be found anywhere on corporate television networks, so stick around and prepare for a wave of controversies. Economic inequality is the difference between individuals or populations in the distribution of their assets, wealth, or income. The term typically refers to inequality among individuals and groups within a society, but can also refer to inequality among countries. With the political temperature rising, new data reveals how sharply inequality has been growing in Britain. A report by the Office for National Statistics has revealed that Britain's wealth gap is growing at an alarming rate, with the country's richest 1% owning as much as the bottom 55% of the population.
While austerity measures in Britain continue to hit the poorest families hardest, a wealthy elite have seen their incomes spiral upwards, exacerbating income inequality, which has grown under successive governments over the last quarter of a century. Since the mid-1990s, the incomes of the top 0.1% have grown almost 4 times faster than the incomes of the bottom 90% of the population. In real terms, that means the richest 0.1% have seen their income grow by more than £461 a week, the equivalent of over £24,000 a year. That's enough to buy a small yacht or a sports car. By contrast, the bottom 90% have experienced a real terms increase of only £147 a year, insufficient to insure a family car. That equates to £2.82 a week, the average cost of a large cappuccino. Today, the 5 richest families in the UK are wealthier than the bottom 20% of the entire population. That's just 5 households with more money than 12.6 million people. Almost the same as the number of people living below the poverty line in the UK. The extreme levels of wealth inequality occurring in Britain today threaten to exclude the poorest, whose standards of living are being squeezed as they are hit by increasing costs for basics like food and energy bills, and cuts to services and support when they are most needed. Growing numbers of Britons are turning to charity-run food banks. At the same time, the highest earners in the UK have had the biggest tax cuts of any country in the world. And whilst low-paid workers are seeing their wages stagnate, the super rich are seeing their pay and bonuses spiral up.
As you look in a newer, freer US and UK, now think about 5,000 students at Oxford and 1 African Brit. That's an international disgrace. You look at the 19,000 professors, 80 are black in this country. Obviously, that disparity issue. 60% of the youth without a job, and that may be a low number. That's disparity, and it predictably leads to antisocial patterns of behavior and the like. And then without an affirmative way to include those who've been locked out, you look at your police forces and firemen and teachers and civil servants as a kind of free but locked out.
1 in 5 people in the UK are living in poverty. Cuts to social security and public services are combining with falling incomes and rising costs for basics like food and fuel bills to create a deeply damaging situation in which millions are struggling to get by.
Austerity is working in the sense that it's creating a lot of wealth for a lot of very rich people. It's creating terrible poverty for the very poorest people in our society. Austerity is all about restructuring society in the image of the rich, not the poor. That's why I want to see a much more radical approach to this economic crisis, and that is the redistribution of wealth.
Where in the Western world do I know of a government that has cut public spending to the extent that we have, failed to invest and achieved growth? It's simply not available as a model for reference or precedent. And so it's the voodoo economics of a government that is simply seeking to fill the pockets of the rich and empty the pockets of the poor. But there is no evidence that such economics works.
Although unemployment numbers are falling, the number of people in insecure jobs is on the rise, and many are on wages that don't pay enough to make ends meet. For the first time, more working households are living in poverty in the UK than non-working ones.
Your only exposure to people on benefits is what you read in the media. I didn't imagine for 1 minute that I'd ever be unemployed, and especially not for as long as I was. I went from having a £27,000 a year job to having absolutely nothing in pretty much overnight. And the jobs that I was applying for, I wasn't even getting interviews for those. And you think, well, what's gone wrong? It's the little things, like when you give your child the last things in the fridge for dinner, and he says, "Why aren't you having any dinner, Mummy?" You say, "Mummy's not very hungry."
In 2012, just over half of the 13 million people in poverty were from working families. Austerity policies are massively increasing poverty and inequality in the UK, damage that could take 2 decades or more to reverse. Research suggests 800,000 children and an extra 1.9 million adults in the UK could be pushed into poverty by 2020. The unprecedented rise of over 500,000 Britons needing emergency aid from food banks is just one example among many of what poverty looks like in the UK. There is significant public concern about the lack of say ordinary people have in the changes that affect their lives. According to a recent Oxfam poll, more than 2/3 of the British population think the rich have too much influence over where the country is headed.
No one wants to listen to us. Voting makes no difference. We vote and then they take us to wars we don't want. They tax us with things that aren't right. They take our money and give it to the bankers.
99% are being oppressed by the 1%.
Why do we pay? The poorest people pay 20% tax, while the richest people pay 1% tax or less.
Extreme economic inequality is damaging because of the negative impact it has on poverty reduction and overall prosperity. It multiplies social problems and compounds other inequalities. In many cases, extreme economic inequality causes unequal political representation. Those with the most money are able to rig the rules and influence government policy in their favour, often at the expense of everyone else.
The government is really trying to push us all out of London. They want only the richest people to be able to live in London. The gas prices are going up, the electric's going up.
Because the government, they're not helping no one out except for the rich people. They don't care for us. They just leave us on the blocks to do whatever we do.
There's a lot of wealth in this city. I mean, you only got to look over there is Canary Wharf behind us. And in this city, there's a real focus on celebrity and money and materialism.
And that's who the government is looking out for. Them people up there, yeah? He's not thinking about, look at this, look at the flats.
Yeah,
yeah, you get me? Like, they're not thinking of us, they're thinking about that one pocket that's up there. That one pocket.
They should put back on EMA, help all the single mothers that are struggling.
Put that back on.
Uni cuts, everything. Like, come on, money-wise, innit? Basically, because this ain't just like we're doing it for the fun of it. We're doing this for money, to survive in this world. But until we get that, or a little bit of support from the government, it's not going to stop.
They are not governing, they're looking after themselves. They're creating enormous amounts of wealth for themselves. And we're enslaved by the government. We're owned by the bankers. If the government defaults on their payments, who have they got as backer to cover that loan? Us, the people. We're enslaved. Why should we be enslaved? Why are we the only species on the planet that has to pay to live here, for God's sake?
The UK's 5 richest families own more wealth than the poorest 20% of the country, according to research from a leading charity, highlighting the stark inequality that exists in Britain and across the world.
The gap between the very richest and the rest of us is getting bigger. Why? A common belief is that it's good for us all if a small group of people earn an enormous amount of money. The theory is that their wealth trickles down to the rest of us. But this is a myth. In reality, money is sucked up from all of us into the pockets of a very small group of people. How does this happen? One reason is the way that money is created. Right now, almost all of the money in our economy is created by banks when they make loans. Now, most people assume that when banks make loans, they're lending out someone else's savings. But they're not. Instead, when somebody takes out a loan, banks create new money electronically by typing numbers into their account. 97% of all the money in our economy is created in this way, as people take out loans from banks. The more loans people take, the more debt there is, and the more money there is. The shocking fact is, if nobody went into debt, there would be almost no money in the economy. Our economy depends on the electronic money created by banks. But because the money is created when people borrow, someone, somewhere, has to pay interest on every pound created. In effect, we are renting the money we need to run our economy from the banks. This means that in the UK alone, together we pay the banks £192 million in interest every single day. And because the debt is held mostly by the bottom 90% and wealth mostly by the top 10%, paying this interest transfers money from the bottom 90% of the population to the very top 10%. It sucks wealth and income from the rest of us up to the very lucky few. So as long as we have to rent the money we use from the banks that create it, we'll have to keep paying this huge interest bill, and the gap between the richest and the rest of us will keep increasing. But there are ways to create money that don't depend on us all going into debt to the banks. We want to see money created by a public body and spent into the economy, so that we don't have to borrow all the money we need from the banks. This would lead to less debt and stop the gap between the richest and the rest of us getting even bigger.
Last week, we shed light on the extent of the British statesmen and women appeasing the Bahraini dictator. This week, we dig even deeper, examining the shameful relations between the House of Windsor and the Al Khalifa family. Alongside British ministers and lords of the realm, the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Charles, and Prince Andrew have all made or hosted visits to the Al Khalifas. Perhaps there is a fraternal bond between the monarchs. A pity that such a bond is being enjoyed at the taxpayers' expense.
Alongside British ministers and lords of the realm, the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Charles, and Prince Andrew have all made or hosted visits to the Al Khalifas. Perhaps there is a fraternal bond between monarchs. A pity that such a bond is being enjoyed at the taxpayers' expense. In 2012, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, Prince Harry, the Duke of York and Princess Beatrice and Eugenie, and the Earl and Countess of Wessex all attended a lunch with the King of Bahrain in London. Human rights groups slammed the meeting.
The UK court has agreed to look into allegations that Bahrain's king's son, one of them, Nasser bin Hamad, had been associated with torture. The court has agreed to look into it, and it has also agreed to remove the anonymity of him, so that the public are aware of who that person is. And then in October they will decide whether he can enjoy immunity and he is immune from prosecution or not. So there is a prince from another country who is linked in one way or another by a court case to torture, yet he is allowed to race in Windsor and to go and enjoy the royalty and the reception that was afforded to him. I think the royalty here should have done much better, and by ignoring him and his request to attend, and by dissociating itself from this regime. We also know that last Friday, for example, there was a conference near the Parliament, and that Prince Andrew, the son of the Queen's son here, was supposed to inaugurate that show, exhibition, and also conference. But after a lot of media coverage, he withdrew at the last minute, and the conference was not attended by any of the royals or the ministers, and the conference was a failure. The people of Bahrain, Bahrainis, had protested outside the conference, and they were, they were granted good coverage by some media. So the case of Bahrain is troubling to the UK, but unfortunately the UK government is trying to defend this regime and to come to its defense at every level, whether inside Bahrain or in UK or even at the Human Rights Council. I hope the UK will soon realize that they are not doing the wise thing.
Mainstream British and American outlets are also to blame for the British public's distorted perception of Bahrain, for not raising more regularly the issue of why the UK is prepared to be so hypocritical in their support for such an autocratic regime. Investigations and scoops can ensure Bahrain's near-blanket banning of international journalists does not result in a media blackout. Bad things happen in the dark. Without the spotlight of journalism shining bright on Bahrain, where press freedom is a sick joke, the pro-democracy struggle will lose a key ally in the British people. Many British pundits are also consistently and carelessly referring to Bahrain's pro-democracy struggle as sectarian. This negligence effectively ensures the Bahraini struggle regresses to the back of the public psyche. Just another example of sectarian strife in a region our media tells us is primarily characterized by sectarian strife. Many of the pro-democracy activists are indeed Shia, and many of the police forces are Sunni. But the fact that political oppression coincidentally falls along sectarian lines does not mean this is a sectarian struggle. And in any case, many Sunni Bahrainis also advocate political change.
To talk about Bahraini revolution as sectarian, again, is a mockery of facts, is turning blind eyes to the facts. because it is the regime that is promoting sectarianism in Bahrain, not the people. The people until today are saying that we are one people and we want the rights of the people, not the rights of the Shia or Sunnis. And in fact, there are other Sunni figures who have been jailed. Until now, there is at least Ibrahim Sharif, who is a prominent Sunni politician, and he is behind bars with the other 12, with another 12 Shia Muslim leaders. So to talk about sectarianism is only a way of deflecting the attention from the real problem. The real problem in Bahrain is that we have a dictatorship, we have a tribalism, we have a regime that is devoid of morality, and it is using every dirty weapon to undermine the opposition, including sectarianism. This is a dirty weapon that the Bahrainis do not believe in and do not like.
Rather, the Bahraini people's struggle should be presented by the British media for what it is, still struggling 3 years later, and dedicated to fixing the huge power imbalances, inequalities, and injustices inherent in the monarchic system.
Unfortunately, the UK authorities have not really understood, or they have not listened to the opinion of the Bahrainis, who are completely upset by the invitation of their dictator. He has been committing serious crimes against the people by ordering the shooting of demonstrators, by also allowing torture to take place, and giving a blind eye to what has been going on behind bars. Also, he is responsible, according to the Bahrainis and according to the evidence, for destroying more than 40 mosques in 2011. And until today, he is against rebuilding these mosques. Some of them have been in existence for more than 500 years before the Al Khalifa came to Bahrain and occupied it with power.
Now, 3 years on, key members of the establishment continue to shill for the Al Khalifas, mainly at British taxpayers' expense, and with concern only for their own careers, personal enrichment, or misguided foreign policies.
We want to hear your take on these issues, so don't forget to email us at britain@presstv.ir. Better yet, you can engage us on Facebook. Our page is called UK Desk Press TV. Well, that's all for this week. You've been watching The Monarchy, and The Monarchy has been watching Britain. See you on our next edition, God willing. Ciao.
Chance away with pomp and circumstance. Come join our merry dance to the rhythm of goodbye. Farewell the jewel crown, farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the king of nothing really. Wave of a hand and a life of Riley. Pot Nazi, Pod King Billy. Goodbye to the crown.